Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to Off the Floor. That's our Discord server. Go to the link in the description. You'll bypass the Apple upcharge. $2.99 per month. This is the place where you go for the most heat, information, conversation, celebration, and lately consternation. Check it out. It's Off the Floor. Link right there in the description. Also, check out Prize Picks. That's the official fantasy sponsor of the Five Reasons Sports Network. I'm 7 for my last 8 plays on there. I'm flying. So check me out there. I post everything on, I just jinxed it. I post everything on Twitter, the artist formerly known as Twitter. Check it out. Use the code 5, F-I-V-E. Put down your $5. Get $50 to play right away and play across the sports spectrum. And now, today's episode.
Mercy, luxurious, Heat Nation, yeah, Mercy and Lago, down to Biscayne, yay, 5 on the floor, ride for my dogs, where here's the thing, you can check the score, hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frauds, down to Biscayne. Kept the floor playing, got it all banned. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat we trust, Inspire have the guts. We're here to bring the heat, y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, Alex Toledo, Brady Hawk, and others from the Five Reasons Sports Network. Also, make sure to subscribe to Off the Floor for the most heat anywhere.
All right, welcome back to 5 on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. It's a national holiday, or at least one in South Florida. It spreads all the way out to Los Angeles. Pat Riley is going to speak. It happens about one time per year these days. He used to be bothered with us more frequently. Now he doesn't really want to take the time. But it is usually eventful, one way or the other. And to talk about it, somebody who's been at some of those press conferences, now he's actually covering the playoffs and the teams that are in it. Jorge Sedano, of course, from ESPN Los Angeles, all things ESPN. This is, I think, episode number 9 for you. You're now 2 ahead of Vinny Goodwill.
Take that, Goodwill.
Yeah, well, that's right. Vinny's probably going to join next week.
By the way, are you a poet and didn't know it? I heard you're open with the commercial.
No, people are making fun of me for that because I'm just coming up with words that rhyme with Asian.
Yeah. And what's with the beard?
Oh, that's a long. So you haven't seen that?
I don't know. I haven't seen you in a long time. I mean, I kind of like it, but it's a different look, I would say.
Well, yeah, you take the advice of the people in your life that you don't want to lose. My daughter doesn't like it, but she's stuck with me.
Yeah.
Others are not stuck with me, as you know my history.
Yeah, it's optional for the others,
yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Right, exactly. So I'm keeping it. But anyway, it took me about 7 years to grow it. So here you go. But we're going to talk about Pat.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting time.
You think?
It's an interesting time, and as I'm watching the playoffs, this is just my general thought here, and I think people need to understand that I've said this. This is not like the Pat Riley top-down organization that it was during the time that you were covering it. This has been a collaborative for a while. Pat's still the face. Nick Harrison has had final say since 2011. Obviously, both Harrisons are involved in the process. Adam Simon's involved in the process. Andy Ellisberg is involved in the process. Zoe is involved in the process. Like this is a collective group thing that they do, but Pat and Spo, of course, is involved in the process more so than he's ever been. But ultimately, when Pat gets the praise and Pat gets the blame, and that's how this goes as long as he's.
And by the way, I don't know if that's fair necessarily. Like, I think that because it's collaborative, I think that the organization needs to be a little more forthcoming. I think, and I love everyone there. Okay,
I know you.
But I think they need to be a little more forthcoming about that because Pat's taking a lot of bullets for the team, and maybe that's part of the deal. Like he's okay with that. But yeah, like I feel like it kind of sucks that he's the one taking all these darts, from some of my colleagues, some people from other places.
Well, some of your colleagues don't really understand how they work. I think that's part of it. And I can't expect them to. You're not going to know how all 30 organizations work. Sure. You have a better grasp of it, obviously, because of your relationships with the organization, which is why we bring you on. But, when Stephen A, who knows more than most, but is coming on and making it all about Pat, that's just sort of a lack of understanding of how they operate at this stage. But look, he's wanted it that way over time too. So this is, it's on him. It's also because we know Nick has made a ton of the final decisions, but he doesn't want to do any media, never has. But when you say he's had final say since 2011, well, they've made 5 finals since then. And
that's my thing. That's the pushback I've had on some of my colleagues and others is, you're shredding them right now, but this is the same group that's been to all these finals, right? And were they dumb then? Did they not know what they were doing? Like, it's just this knee-jerk reaction in a lot of ways. But I do also understand some of the criticism because you've seen it trending in the wrong direction. But here's what I'll say. I did the Ryan Russillo podcast earlier this morning, and we talked about this at large, and I think the Heat fall into this category because we were talking about Boston, New York, and we kind of pinpointed that the Heat were the team that kind of changed the calculus on this era of parity in the NBA, where we saw them jump out of the play-in, beat Milwaukee, get to a finals, right? Like, we saw them do that. Even this year, as awful as it ended, I mean, they were the first 10 seed to get to the playoffs, right? Like, so they've kind of been the poster child for the way that the regular season has been treated, which is wild because you would have never have thought that based on a Pat Riley Miami team. Right?
Remember the Shaq stuff? Remember that when Shaq?
Right.
We don't really need to be the 1 seed. Like, and everybody was like, "Oh my God, you said that in a Riley organization."
Right. And then remember Riley's post-game presser there, right? You can't come here and just play 40 games or whatever it was that he said. That was the year after they won the championship, and they lost. They got swept by Chicago. But anyway, we were talking about how the Heat kind of have changed the calculus, and I think a lot of teams have viewed that. But I think what the calculus is now, and this is where the Heat have played with fire too many times, and I heard one of your last podcasts talking about that Indiana game last year, not this season, the previous season, is teams want to stay out of the play-in, Ethan, because they want that week's worth of rest. They want that week's worth of game planning. And again, because the play-in just causes way too much variance and too much stress on what can potentially go down. So and it puts you behind the 8 ball once you do get in, if you do get beyond the that play-in area. So I think that fans are right, and some of the media are right about that, is that this is trending clearly in the wrong direction. You went from being the team that came out of the play-in as the 8 seed to get to the finals to now the 10 seed and getting destroyed in the first round. So clearly there needs to be a direction change here in one way, shape, or form.
Well, and I think you hit on a key point earlier. I don't think it's that anybody thinks that the Heat front office got dumber, which is, again, it's the same front office. It's just more of a collaborative with more voices. It's whether or not things have passed them by. I think that's more the question, and it's not just the playing.
See, I don't believe that. I don't believe that.
But let me throw it at you. Okay, let me go through that argument here, because we know that social media is there's a cacophony of voices. It's just noise at this point. Yeah. Everybody wants Pat fired. Most of them were born in 2005. Okay, but the reality is, and again, I don't mean to be ageist here. I wish I was born in 2005.
Me
also,
too.
I would have skipped a lot of shit in my life. But I'm just saying that's pretty much where it is in the social media space.
Yes.
But I think that their point is, okay, at least the rational ones, all right? Their point is that it used to be you cleared cap space, right? And then you dangled Miami. You dangled the no state taxes. You dangled the stability of the organization. You dangled, let's be honest, South Beach, the women, the whole thing, okay? You just dangled Miami and you won, okay? And that's how this works. If you clear the space, it's like what Pat said, okay? When Andy was starting to clear the space and all this, and they were looking 2008, and they basically wasted 2 years of Dwayne's best years. Okay, not intentionally, but they were trying to build back up. Remember, they almost got Odom, which would have blown up the whole thing, okay, if they had actually gotten him, if they'd gotten him back during that time. But the whole idea was, okay, clear the cap space for 2010. And what Pat said, and I think he said this on the South Beach sessions with Levitard at one point, he's like, why would they not come if they could? And that's what it's been. If you clear the space, build the space, and they will come. Well, that's not how it operates anymore.
Not anymore.
At all.
No.
The CBAs have changed it. You can't even really pair 3 max guys together anymore. You have to make sure. We had a Mike Wallace on the other day, and he made a great point. He's like, and I've been saying this too, you cannot max guys who are not max. Okay.
Correct.
And we saw David Griffin kind of drew the line with Brandon Ingram. Ultimately, he lost his job. But you can't pay a guy like Tyler Hero $50 million a year when he's a one-way player. You can pay him 35 to 40, but you can't pay him 50 a year. So all of this has changed. The CBA has made it impossible to make trades. The Heat would have made a trade with Phoenix, but you had the issue where Phoenix was in second apron. You couldn't make certain deals. And I guess the question is, this is an organization where the league still goes to Andy to solve, their cap issues. Like this organization did not get dumber, okay? But have some of the methods that they've used become somewhat antiquated, because it's not like a star says to come to you and it just works at that point.
They got to pick a lane, man. Either rebuild or go and collect assets, right? And the way you collect assets is taking on contracts that are undesirable and making those guys play closer to what their floor and ceiling potentially are, right? Like raise them to their floor if they're not playing to their floor, and raise them to their ceiling, or as close to their ceiling as possible, and make the most of a bad contract. If you look at them historically in the early days, they've done some of that, right? Like they took on guys, granted, different basketball world, different ceiling, different in regards to the cap and things of that nature. But we saw a lot of guys rejuvenate their career in the early days of Pat in Miami, right? Like there's a litany of guys that did that. And I think they need to kind of go back to that a little bit if they want to do that, because the only way you can collect picks, which is the way you end up getting guys, is taking on some bad contracts. Look at the Celtics. They got picks for taking Porzingis. Think about that for a second. Okay. Yeah. And that is the kind of stuff you have to do. And they've been unwilling to do. They've been trying to split down the middle, right? Like play both sides, right?
But then didn't Jimmy do them a favor? See, that's the way I look at this. Didn't Jimmy force a direction here by acting like a child?
Yes. But also, if you look at it, they've also been incredibly fortunate in a lot of ways that things have broken their way, right? I mean, they stole Jimmy Butler, if you think about it, okay? Mm-hmm. And, previous to that, and again, this is not a knock on Pat, because every great executive needs something and someone to dangle to get other players to join them. But if you look at the history of this organization, you can tie everything to Dwayne Wade. You know what I mean? Like you can.
Well, hold on. Okay, I don't know. I know that is said. I get that part of it.
Are you denying that?
I'm a Dwayne guy, but let's go back on a couple of things here.
Everything good has happened because Dwayne Wade has been a part of the organization.
That has certainly helped, and the selection of Dwayne Wade certainly helped. And they got Dwayne Wade in part because they refused to tank the last game of the season in Toronto in 2003, and I got a nasty message that I wrote a column for the Sun Sentinel saying they should lose. Yeah. And they were like, we don't do that. Yeah. And then they won, and then they ended up slipping for 4 to 5, or else they probably would have ended up with Bosch earlier and not Wade. And who knows how this plays out. Right. I'm not going to argue against Dwayne Wade. You know that with me. Okay. But I'm just saying that they've also caught a lot of bad breaks prior to Dwayne and even after.
Oh, no, I don't dispute that.
With Bosch, with all that kind of stuff. And they've rebounded, George. And my issue now is I don't know what the path is for them to rebound. I always kind of had confidence that they would sort of figure it out no matter what happened to them. And right now what I see, and I want you to just focus on this right, I see a roster that is not a Riley roster.
No.
Like, they're under talented, but they're also under tough. Like I'm watching the Knicks and I'm like, that roster.
They're tough.
That's a Pat roster. Like Anunoby, Hart, Bridges. Brunson. Yeah. Like that's the kind of roster that Pat would have built in New York. And like I think they're as talented or more talented than those New York teams when you add Towns into the mix. But like that's a New York type roster, but that's a Riley gritty roster. Who on this? I'm just asking this. Like this team didn't have any resilience until the very end. Okay, when they won those 2 play-in games against 2 very mediocre teams. Okay, on the road. Like I don't see that. I see it in Davion Mitchell, and I'm struggling to see it in a lot of the other guys.
Yeah. So here's what I don't want to belabor the previous or bemoan the previous conversation that we were having. I don't want to oversimplify the Dwayne thing, right? But let's just say this. Yes, they overcame a ton of different things. Hell, and previous to him and even during, right? I would say. But all the greatest things that have ever happened to this organization are some way and somehow tied to Dwayne Wade. Shaq, LeBron, Wade. and even Jimmy Butler. All right, so I digress. Let's move on. You're right. Their best players are the third and fourth best players on a championship contender. That's part of the problem, right? So I'd start with that. I would say that they have found themselves in a situation where, again, it goes back to what I was trying to say. They need to pick a lane. Either you go full rebuild and just say, all right, everybody's on the table for a rebuild and acquiring assets, right? To then utilize those assets down the road in exchange for the next big fish, whale, whatever you want to call it, right? Or you use one of those players, either Tyler, and they've shopped Tyler, we know that, although they claim they haven't. I don't believe that. And even Bam, I heard you say this. Everyone should be on the table. If you want to acquire the next star, you do need to put everyone on the table to acquire that next star. You know, when Shaq was traded to Miami, they loved Lamar. Dude, people don't realize this, okay?
Yeah, they did.
Pat Riley, when Lamar came out, and you know this, Pat Riley, when Lamar came out in the draft,
tried to trade P.J. Brown to move up. Yeah,
correct. And he loved P.J. And he likened him to Magic Johnson, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Okay? They loved Karan. You know, Karan that year with Dwayne and Lamar was dealing with all sorts of injuries, but Karan clearly had high upside, and everybody knew it.
And had a big playoff game after he was hurt.
Correct. So they had to, it's what you were saying in the last podcast, give something to get something.
Right.
And I think that they're at that phase now. The problem is they probably waited too long to give something to get something, because people now feel like Bam is a formed player, and that we've probably seen the best of Tyler Hero now at this point in most people's eyes. I mean, could he get better in the margins? Maybe. But that's it. And with Bam, if they do keep Bam, which I would be a proponent of, I like Bam. I think Bam fits all the stuff that we've talked about. Like, he fits a Pat Riley roster. But if there's one thing about Bam that I think he needs to change, and I know they push back on this about his offense or whatever. Yeah, everyone talks about the threes, and I know he took more or whatever. To me, it's not the threes. It's put the ball on the floor, impose your will, get to the basket, and finish strong or get to the foul line.
They're making him into a softer player by focusing on the threes. I'm not saying, and I want to get to the questions for Riley on the other side, and we'll do them rapid fire because I know you got a lot of things to do too. But to me, it's about getting him to play with force, consistency, aggression. This thing about like threes, I know he can become a better 3-point shooter at the end of the year, and I know that I take the blame for this. I was the one who said, well, Bosch started taking threes, and I was like, what are they doing with that? But again, that was a different kind of team.
Bosch had a beautiful stroke. Like, that's
he did it. Bam's got a nice stroke too. That's not the issue.
It's better than it used to be, but it's not.
Bosch is all time in that regard. Right. So I was wrong. But the other thing about that team was built in an inverse, okay?
Right.
In the sense that Dwayne and LeBron were to the rim. So Bosch provided this release point. Mm-hmm. With this team, they do not have that guy.
No, they don't have
to get to the basket. And that's why they can't get to the line. And that's a big issue. And Wiggins is not going to solve that problem. So they don't have that guy. On the other side of this, though, I got
on Wiggins real quick. The biggest misnomer about Wiggins was that he was, quote unquote, the second best player on a team that won a championship, maybe statistically, but I was there, okay, for those conference finals and finals. All right. The best player was clearly Steph. He had the best. He was basically the release valve is what I would call it, because Draymond was touching the ball, the second most beyond Steph, and Klay was still getting a ton of touches. Klay that year, people forget that Klay that season, coming off the multiple injuries, had two of his highest scoring months in his entire career at the end of that season. It was January and March, if I recall correctly, where he had like the first and third highest scoring average of his entire career. So Klay, they squeezed the last great year out of Klay that year. And yes, Andrew Wiggins was the beneficiary of being the second best statistical player, but he was not the second best player on that team.
All right. In a second, I want to get to what was sort of the title of this is what should Pat Riley answer for? So, because people are telling us to stomp our feet. We'll do this in 5 minutes on the other side. Stomp our feet. Why didn't
Bang
you
on the
trade?
table.
Why didn't you pay or trade Jimmy? And then we just storm out. I don't know what movies they've been watching, but you and I will try to craft some questions here on the other side. Before we do, want to mention Water Cleanup of Florida. You can find them at WCUFL.com. Michael, Robert, their entire team. Don't wait until a leak gets too bad, okay? You don't want your house getting flooded. Got to deal with the insurance companies. No. Reach out to some ethical people from the very beginning. Every time we send somebody Water Cleanup of Florida, we say thank you. Okay, and they got more than 200 5-star reviews on Google. So check them out. It's Water Cleanup of Florida, based in Boca Raton, but they service the entire Tri-County area. And again, it's WCUFL.com. If you've got the schmutz, they got the guts. All right, so that's the title of this. What should Pat Riley answer for? You're in that press conference.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we know Ira and Barry already have their questions lined up, so I'll try to sneak in one along the way. We also know that Pat tends to, and he's not quite as scripted as he used to be in this regard, but he tends to do the preemptive thing where I would always go down to press conferences when he was the coach or something like that, like waiting to ask him something, and he would criticize himself before you had a chance. And by the time that it was like, okay, I feel bad at this point. There's no point even asking. He acknowledges
But I think that's what he should do here. I think like we talked about, if he's going to take all the bullets for the organization anyway, that's what he needs to do. Hey, so even though I think it's unfair the way to some extent that they allow him to take all the bullets at this stage of his life at 80 years old, if that's going to be the role, then he needs to embrace it even further. I would say he needs to take control of that press conference and say, hey, this starts and ends with me. We have not lived up to what our expectations are. And Spo started to allude to that at his presser the other day. Right. And I think that he needs to do some of that and say, this starts and ends with me. We could have done things differently. We will do things differently moving forward, and then open it up to questions, which my first question would be, what's the direction? What are you going to do? Because you don't have the requisite amount of assets in theory, if a player became available, to compete with some of the teams that have an enormous treasure chest of assets.
Well, so George, that's the problem, isn't it? Because you're talking about a team in OKC, okay? And I know it's not an attractive destination, but you're talking about a team that scored 78 points in the first half and has 78 first-round picks over the next 5 years.
87, by the way, 87 points.
Well, 87. You're right, 87. It was 78 when I tweeted it. How do you compete with that? Other than that, we're Miami. How do you compete with that? If Giannis says yes to OKC, that's it. It's end of story, right?
Right. But what you need, look, and I love Damian Lillard, but if Damian Lillard would have had a little more Jimmy Butler in him, he would have been in Miami. And I think, look, granted, Dame has had some injury issues, but I think based on the way you see Jimmy and Draymond playing with Steph, we at least see the vision of what that would have looked like to some extent, right? Not to say Dame is Steph, but he's probably the closest thing to him, right? Even though he's not Steph. And Draymond and Bam have some similarities, and I would say Bam is an even better player from a talent perspective than Draymond, even though Draymond brings intangibles that Bam does not have. So I think that's what you need. You need, and I don't think it's going to be Giannis, although we saw the Howard Beck story about like he thinks it's going to be the glamour cities, LA, New York, or Miami. I think that's what they need. They need someone to be a Jimmy Butler in this situation, which is the irony of all of it, and say, it's there. That's the place, and deal with whatever comes with it. Because they don't have what OKC has, which nobody has, but they don't have what Houston has. They don't have what San Antonio has, for that matter. Okay,
they don't have what Utah has. If anybody wants to play in Utah
or Chicago, for that matter, which is also a city that was named in the Howard Beck report or commentary about Giannis. So it has to be that. If you're going to get one of the whales, it's that, or you take a quote unquote distressed asset, right? Maybe it's John Morant. Maybe it's Paul George.
What about Zion? What about Zion?
Or Zion, right? Like you have to take a distressed asset and believe that you, based on your culture and everything you've done historically on building guys back up, that you can do that with these guys. And they have a history of that. So, and maybe you can get some assets in return for taking these guys, or at the very least, you're in a more competitive situation because teams would be more reluctant to give up those assets, and you have to be willing to take a risk because you believe in your own culture to make that player better and fit and reach their potential or as close to their potential as possible.
All right. So final thing here, okay? Because I know, again, we're leaning.
But they need to pick a direction. And by the way, I would say it's that or rebuilding. Which way do you go? And he's going to tell you they don't rebuild.
Right. Do Heat fans tolerate a rebuild? A real rebuild?
They say they would, and you and I both know there's no chance in hell. I am in like 60,000 group chats that all tell me they should tank and rebuild. I'm like, you guys wouldn't stomach that for 1 second.
No.
That arena would be empty.
Yes, it would, even with the tickets sold, because I know the tickets are sold for next year, but it would look awful, and we know how that would play out. All right, so let me ask you this, because you had said, and we'll close here, you had said that you thought they should have tried to trade Jimmy before the season when they knew things weren't going to go well. In this press conference specifically, there are people who
pay him. It was either pay him or trade him. It was one or the other. It was very binary. Yes.
Okay, right, and you're talking about this as a binary choice too, which is basically you're either going to try to press forward, get distress asset, try to be the Heat, right, with what you have, or you go back and you rebuild, which again we know. I agree with you. I don't think the fans will tolerate it. Everybody on Off the Floor disagrees with me, but whatever. Okay, but you made this thing. You spoke about how they should have traded Jimmy before the season. We can argue about what was actually out there for him. But would you focus in this press conference on that? Because I feel like fans want a pound of flesh for what they didn't do. And I think it's more important that Pat indicates what they're going to do. Like, at this point, who gives a damn, right?
I agree with you. Although I think I think in that preamble, right, you address it and say, hey, the way things went, we didn't expect it to go that way. That's on us. We probably should have handled that differently in regards to the way that transaction took place. And we will learn from that and move on, et cetera, et cetera. To me, he says that. And I feel like that puts an end to that, or it should at least put an end to that.
All right. What direction, and this final thing after the final thing, what direction do you think they will choose?
I think they will try to chase. Like, that's what they do. And look, maybe he pulls a rabbit out of his hat again. He's done it before. Again, I think Dwayne Wade helped a lot in those times. But Pat Riley and this group, Nick Arison, Alonzo Mourning, Eric Spoelstra, Adam Simon, Andy Ellisberg, if anyone can concoct a way to make the impossible possible, we've seen it historically. This is probably, I know people like to talk about approval ratings in politics these days over the last, 12 years or 16 years. I think that their approval rating is as low as it's been in a while because they don't have the belief. People don't have the belief that they can pull it off in this era. I think this is the last stand for this Pat Riley-led Miami Heat. And I think that even though, as we've addressed it, it is collaborative, but, him as the face of the organization outwardly, I think this is their last stand of trying to make it happen one more time. So they need to be open to whatever is out there. And again, if it's not Giannis, if it's not Kevin Durant, it needs to be the other guys we discussed, even as someone like Paul George. I know that contract looks onerous now, but there's a good player in there. They have to be the ones to bring that out of any of those guys. So yeah, to me, that would be what I'd want to know is, and I know he can't talk about specific players, but give me the path on how you believe, if you do believe you're going to be able to get one of these guys that could become available, how you can make that happen. And it can't just, and maybe it is as simple. He said it during the Dame thing, or right before the Dame thing. He said they just need to say they want to come here and we'll figure it out. Well, that backfired because again, the player was not willing to go to the mattresses. They need to know, they need to do their own reconnaissance and know if that player is going to be willing to go to the mattresses or not.
I appreciate it, George. Yeah, this is, again, as much as I love it, this is not the time for Springsteen lyrics. I think that he is being watched right now. I think in a way
no doubt.
that he hasn't been. And you're right.
He's under more scrutiny than he's ever been. There's no question. And it's at the end of his career, and it sucks that people are doing that to him. But it's also on a little bit. It's understandable because that's the way the organization has positioned it, where it's this is his organization
until it's Spo, which looks like is ultimately what it's going to be if you just look at the way that this.
Yeah, and I think Spo needs to take if I were advising them, I think Spo and he's very hands-on to some extent now. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think he needs to assert himself even further. I would say him and Adam. I think Adam Simon and him probably, and Nick, the three of those guys, I think they're the best at their job. Well, Andy too, obviously, but I feel bad because I'm like taking Andy out of the equation. Those four particularly are going to be the future of this organization.
But we know Spo is going to. We know as they're currently constituted, Spo's going to be the face to the league.
He's going to be the pop.
Everybody's good at their individual jobs, but we know.
Right, but I think that it's got to be Spo being the face eventually, and maybe the time is coming for that. Where maybe this is Pat's last stand, and then it's handed off to Spo in good shape and let him mold it the way he wants to mold it.
It's hard for Spo to really speak out while Pat is still in the picture.
Oh, no, I get it.
You see what I'm saying? So I kind of feel like, but the USA basketball ties, the connection with the current players, the reputation.
Players love Spo. Those USA guys loved him, okay? Right. Everyone I talked to in and around that group, they all loved being around Spo.
It's been decades since Pat's been involved in that stuff. So and I know he wanted to be the coach of it at some point, but anyway, that's where we're at. All right, George, appreciate it. Vinny's coming on next week. Howard, by the way, you mentioned Howard Beck. I think he's coming on for time number 5 next week. So he's gaining on you. Thank you. By the time I see you, maybe I'll shave this. I'm not really sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll be listening for Pat and then the subsequent 5 Reasons podcast afterwards. Yes. You'll probably get like 30 podcasts out of it, I'm sure.
I just defer to Brady these days. Have a good one.
See ya.